Blockchain is a really stupid technology. Our freedoms are being taken away. I was energy blind, this kind of separative mindset. But it's interesting you mentioned Napoleon, dark side of our technological dependence. Prescription for humanity.
How would you introduce yourself to a person who is not from our planet, who just doesn't know anything about our planet, but coincidentally speaks English?
Maybe I'm introducing myself to such people every day, who knows? Where are you from? So I've been hanging out too long with people down in at the pyramids, telling me stories. How would I introduce myself to someone from outer space? Wow, so Homo sapien learned to be human in late capitalism in the West, with this weird situation of having huge access to information and yet a deep fear of reality, and therefore more attracted to stories that please me, distract me, keep me in denial. In 2018, I released a paper on climate change called Deep Adaptation, which was the result of me taking a year off my university job, unpaid leave, to look at the climate science myself for the first time since I'd studied it at university as an undergraduate. And I concluded from reading the primary climate science that I had been misled by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, their reports, because in the pursuit of consensus, there had been a watering down of some of the most salient research, which is the most shocking about the speed of change in our environment and in climate. So I concluded in 2018 that climate change has a momentum of its own, so maybe anything we do now might not work in slowing it. We should still try, but it might not work. And we're going to have catastrophic change in the environment because of that, which is going to collapse modern societies, life as we know it, in our lifetimes. And therefore, people like you and me will be struggling to survive in our lifetimes because of the direct and indirect damage from climate change. And I thought I couldn't walk away from my profession in corporate sustainability without putting all that sort of together in a paper. So I wrote the paper Deep Adaptation for my profession, which is the corporate sustainability profession, both consultants, activists, and academics. But it went viral, and within 18 months there was 1 million downloads, and it created this movement worldwide of deep adaptation, which is trying to be our best selves in the face of collapse. So typically people think, oh, if you think society is going to collapse, then you don't give a shit about doing anything useful, or you'll start thinking about how can I get a gun or buy tinned food. But that's not how most people respond. If they take this to heart, it's painful. There's a lot of grief, sadness, as well as fear and confusion. So a lot of people want to talk about it and they don't know how to talk about it. So I was providing a framework for people to talk about it together. And over the last 6 years, most people I've met who've taken it to heart have changed their lives. They've integrated it in a way where they're more present, more loving, creative, courageous, and they're more involved in their community. They're doing ecological enterprises, that kind of thing. So that's the Deep Adaptation paper 6 years ago. And this book, Cayendo Juntos in Spanish, is following up that. It was a 2.5-year project with a whole group of scholars to help me do the research to assess what's happening with societal collapse. We concluded that it's already underway in the majority of countries worldwide. And then so the book explores why did this happen and what can we do about it.
When you're mentioning about cutting down and slowing down, there is a concept that blockchain is likely to help us to have more transparency in how we live in democracies. So how to resolve this dilemma? Well, because if we need technology, we need more energy, right? So it's difficult to cut down or to slow down.
So a lot of the, what I might call technotopian view is energy blind. I was energy blind. I believed the Kool-Aid that we could just get off fossil fuels with renewable technologies, so solar, wind, wave, tidal, geothermal. And I was a bit ambivalent on nuclear. The existing technology of nuclear creates too much nasty waste, but there's some interesting modular reactors which don't create that kind of waste and don't have the meltdown risk. But I used to believe the Kool-Aid that we could just get off fossil fuels. But 80 to 83% of primary energy generation worldwide is still fossil fuels. And the renewables sector has been booming, but it's only been adding to the energy mix because demand keeps growing. It's not replacing fossil fuels. We've had I think maybe the highest amount of coal burning last year than ever. So we've got the highest human emissions from fossil fuel burning last year, I think, than ever. So it's, yeah. So the technotopian story is seeming to be energy blind, and the implications of those energy demands, which are either polluting the atmosphere or digging up often pristine environments under other people's feet to get the metals to electrify society. So I want to make that clear because it's a context. You know, technology is an aspect of nature, not separate from nature. So there's this weird ideology that's come, which is as if technology is somehow magically separate from reality and can define reality itself. It's a subset of nature, not above and beyond nature. So I think that talking about energy helps point to that to begin with. Then whether technologies are useful, every technology seems to be good or bad. You could say that about the wheel. I mean, the wheel helped people get, grain in over longer distance to the market, but it also helped people fight each other better. Every technology seems to be good and bad. And so databases on computers, good and bad. So therefore, databases distributed between computers, which is only what blockchain is. I mean, people like to sound funky and up to date. I was talking about blockchain. I did a TEDx about currency innovation and blockchain in 2011. And because I was super into, and I remember I waved my phone at the audience and says, hey, we're going to be having near field communication to like pay just tapping our phones. And I was like, gee whiz, that was 2011.
So what happened?
But the thing is, if we focus on the technology like blockchain, and we're not looking at power relations and social relations, then we're just being silly. And there's so many people in that whole space haven't really been very coherent. And the reason why anyone's paid any attention to them is just purely the animal spirits, the desire, the greed and desire to speculate, to get rich quick. The whole pump and dump, which has been characteristic of blockchain and crypto. So I have been a critic of the monetary system. My book is very critical of the banking system and the way that it's driving collapse, driving destruction of the environment, just as a time when we need to, as you say, slow down and reduce resource consumption. But I advocate for monetary systems which bring us together rather than just encourage speculation. And blockchain can be a tool in monetary systems that bring us together, or post-blockchain systems like holochain and holocoin, because blockchain is a really stupid technology. The idea that you have to update the whole global database for every transaction everywhere in the last however many minutes, just for one transaction to go through, it's a nonsense. And the whole proof of work mining thing, nonsense. The whole proof of stake thing for issuing new currency, nonsense. This is neither of those things are either energetically sensible or socially smart. If you want more equity in society and you want to enable interaction and exchange rather than just profit the early adopters. So blockchain may be useful, but the thing you pointed to is that the dependence on electricity means we're becoming ever more dependent. And at the moment, it's only when there's a big thing like a hurricane hitting Florida or North Carolina when people realize oh dear, we're rather too dependent on electricity. But even now, it's a bit mad that our ability to go down to the corner shop and buy a loaf of bread is going to be dependent on 6 international companies that are involved in the verification of every card payment we make, whether it's through our phone or just directly with a card. So all these people who talk about some sort of future tyranny of central bank digital currencies, they are distracted, and maybe being deliberately distracted from the existing dependence we have on multinational corporations who surveil everything and could switch us off at any moment. And if we're really naughty, like WikiLeaks, then you are switched off by these companies. Have been, it's happened.
Yeah.
So what's to say this doesn't spread? So yeah, I think it's important to think about multiple levels of resilience, including resilience to disruptions to electricity supply, but also resilience against authoritarian abuse. And this sort of everyone smiling about technology means we're not paying attention to the dark side of our technological dependence.
So about right-wing agenda, right now they are selling us this right-wing agenda because the climate change is approaching, so we have to be united, but under the very strong right hand. How we, humanity, should react on cultural level. Napoleon movie was about that, like romanticizing, this right-wing agenda. So the dictator is efficient and is the thing that we need.
I haven't seen the movie. Sounds like I should. But it's interesting you mentioned Napoleon, because in my lecturing on leadership, I talk about how the great man's story of leadership has been taught to us across different cultures from birth in all manner of ways. So political leadership, business leadership, and there's really good research in the field called critical leadership studies, which shows that actually it's a social construction rather than a scientific fact, that an individual at the top of a hierarchy matters more than anyone else. So one of the super famous study done in the 80s, where if you present people with information, totally made up information, like this is a company that does really well, same company does moderately well, company does really badly. And then you ask people how important was the leader for each of those 3 scenarios. And you give total nonsense information about the leader, the boss. Like, they like cats. Although that would mean I think they'd be a good leader. But anyway, but basically irrelevant information to judging whether they were involved in the success, medium success or failure. It's always the leaders to be praised, or the leader is to be blamed if anything is above or below expectations. So if the business does really well or does really badly, it must be the leader. If the country does really well or really badly, it must be the leader. And that's a super simplistic story, which helps people just like, oh, that's the reason. But therefore we don't actually look at what really happened and what's happening. Social dynamics, market forces, geopolitics, what's going on that's actually leading to the outcome. But that's that social construction of the over-salience of the idea, that the over-significance of the individual with power, that doesn't come from nowhere. It's taught to us. It's taught to us in history. So for example, people will talk about Napoleon and how important he was, might not look at the power structures that then lent him lots of money, because you can't have a Napoleon if you don't have the money. So maybe Napoleon was just playing one role in geopolitical power structures and shifts at the time, which were systems of lots of people and lots of interests. So yeah, this focus on the one individual is very dumb, and the thing is, it's a useful dumbness. It's useful to power, because we can then just all focus on whether we like or hate Trump or whoever it is. And we're not actually looking at systems of power. It doesn't actually matter much who's got the top job at the moment, because the systems are in place and frame the options and the choices. And so yeah, that's a meaning that if we want to create social change, we need to think slightly differently than just getting a new person in charge.
A new person, or it's more like a decentralized leadership?
Yeah, so when my Deep Adaptation paper went viral and lots of people got in touch with me because I'd had an impact on them, there was a lot of sort of expectation that I would tell them what to do or what should be done in the world, that I am now the leader. And so my response to it was to create the Deep Adaptation Forum, which would be a framework for people to talk to each other about what to do. And also we did a facilitated process where the most active volunteers would share their ideas for what this new forum should be doing. And we had a rotating coordinator, so it wouldn't be me. I left quite early on. We also had we were very focused on deliberative processes. And since I've left, they've taken that even further. Some people criticize deliberative processes and flat non-hierarchies as meaning that two things. One is nothing can really change. People sort of agree on the existing agendas. You're not really going to see a shift much. It's just sort of a way of things maintaining themselves. The other criticism is it provides secret power to the facilitator. So whoever's basically setting the agenda and say facilitating the sociocratic process has immense power, which is kind of a little bit hidden. And I think that can be quite dishonest. Well, it is dishonest quite often if the facilitator doesn't admit that. And so, who frames the agenda sets the agenda. So that that's the crucial power within the facilitator. So you've got to be careful there. But yeah, I talk about the Deep Adaptation Forum because it's an example of how I try to respond to attention on me in a way which would be more participative and less patriarchal.
And speaking about participative, that's beautiful that there are lots of people who are willing to participate, but at the same time, right now we have like tendencies like news avoidance, or something is going to happen with the climate change or with the world, and I don't want to interact with that. So how to involve these people and how to activate these people who are thinking that there's going to be a man who is going to come and solve.
So you also mentioned right-wing politics earlier, and that manifests in different ways in different countries. And so I think rather than talking right-wing, I prefer to talk about authoritarian view, should we say, which is that you and I are a little bit naughty. We're a little bit, we're not good for each other, and we need Big Daddy, typically male, but it could be it could be a female, but telling us what to do, manipulating us for our own good, and maybe punishing us if we don't behave as we should for our own interests. So it's this strict father framing which is part of the authoritarian story, that if things are going bad for us in society, maybe cost of living, maybe we're in debt, maybe we think, we can't really afford to have kids, whatever's going wrong in our lives.
Yeah, all insecurities.
It's like what we need is the strict authoritarian to fix it for us because we can't fix it for ourselves. So within the authoritarian story is the idea that we're somehow not already oppressed. Like the difficulties we're facing are not because we're oppressed by the system. Our freedoms are being taken away. The cost of land is going up, not just because it's going up, but because of the way the monetary system works, and because therefore it's producing all these new mortgages to buy houses, to put up the prices, to put up the rents, to put up therefore the cost of everything. So again, within the authoritarian story is often a deep lie around the fact that we're not already oppressed and forced to live in certain ways, and the economic system is not already exploiting us. So I see it quite differently. In my book, I advocate for eco-libertarianism, which is to spot the ways that we are being oppressed by the current system and forced to live in more acquisitive, competitive, short-termist ways, forced to become numb to the suffering in the world and in nature and amongst people. And say, well, can we not free ourselves up, help free ourselves up to feel differently and live differently in future? So yeah, it's a different paradigm. I'm explicitly anti-authoritarian in my analysis and in my proposals, and that's what the book is about and why I was motivated to finish it, to provide a different framework for an environmentalism in this new era, which is a worrying era of ecological, cultural, political, economic disruption, an alternative to the authoritarian view.
And how could we, in the world that is so full in different continents of wars and activists, including Greta Thunberg, saying that no climate justice in occupied lands, resolve this dilemma or reconcile political agenda with climate change issues?
It's interesting because I don't think you can be a real true environmentalist today without being a political revolutionary. And perhaps you never could. And I participated in the delusion, the technocratic delusion that you could somehow just leave global capitalism as it is, leave the money system as it is, and just try and promote green consumerism and some more green enterprise and hope technology will resolve the really tough problems like energy. And hope that regulations will be strong enough to stop toxics entering the environment. They weren't. We now have forever chemicals forever, which are damaging our endocrine systems and giving us cancer. And there's nothing much we can do about it. So that paradigm has obviously already failed. The question then becomes, what kind of political revolutionary? And as we've already talked about, I do not believe in the authoritarian view. So I think that it's oppressive systems, including the way that the market system and capitalism has shaped us, got us all into debt. That's part of the problem. So I'm interested in how we free ourselves up to live more in harmony with each other and nature, rather than just have a few scared, frustrated, grief-stricken, and somewhat angry environmentalists seizing power and forcing us to change behavior, which is what some people worry about. That's why they're producing this sort of conspiratorial content about thinking Bill Gates is going to stop you eating your hamburgers and all that. It's a rather silly and incorrect way of talking about a felt concern, which is that we're just going to see a lot of eco-authoritarians in the years to come.
You also mentioned that we have to dismantle this perception of our predecessors as very primitive, and to pay attention how they reconnected with the nature. So being here in Mexico, there is a question because Maya deforested huge territories because they wanted to build their temples, because they wanted to develop their agriculture, and there are lots of examples like that. Or indigenous people, while selling ayahuasca, that is so popular right now. So part of that, they are also doing harm to Amazon. But speaking about these cultures or civilizations that you mentioned that we should pay attention to, how do they reconnect with nature? What kind of examples do you have in mind?
So from what I've learned, I agree there can be a simplistic romanticizing of indigenous cultures as in harmony with nature and everything being great in the past, or even in indigenous cultures today where they, And so I particularly, but then that means we can look more closely at, well, what did indigenous cultures learn? So I love what Lila June says. She's an American. She's from her lineage is from one of the First Peoples, Native Americans in North America, and she studied the relationship. She did a PhD studying the relationship between the indigenous peoples and their ecologies, their habitats, and challenged the idea that these were entirely sort of wild habitats where there was only hunting and gathering. She showed very clearly that over time there was stewardship of the environment. So in a sense, we were more like a wild gardening species. We would improve the biodiversity and also the useful productivity for us for food of various habitats. And she said this wasn't natural, like as in, she says this wasn't what they always did. She says we weren't born this cool, that we actually destroyed our environments. And in our oral traditions, and we know that we destroyed our environment and we then repaired it and we learned to be more in harmony with nature. So we can look closer and not pretend that there weren't problems and see, but then see how they address those problems. I think that was, I talk about it in my book in chapter 9. But yeah, you're right. Today, many indigenous peoples groups are just trying to protect their lands or get a better economic deal if they just basically agree that their lands will be taken for timber or minerals. And so, yeah, it's more of just a basic political struggle. And I have to accept, I accept that they're trying to, they've experienced a lot of racism, a lot of appropriation of their lands for centuries, 500 years in this continent. So if it's like I have to meet them where they're at. But yeah, I'm very privileged to have met elders who are seeing the importance of offering their wisdom traditions and their practices to people today to help us live differently in this time. So that's what I did a Temazcal with an elder in Teotihuacan, Don Alvaro, and yeah, he's very much in that mindset of bringing his beauty to the world for other people who are ready to receive it and to help them shift and commit to live more in harmony with each other and nature.
What kind of emotional or mental faculties we should develop as a humanity so that to be ready for the crisis?
We need to become better at feeling uncertain and unsafe. No matter where we are, what culture, what economic status, what religion, and we need to become a bit more okay with being uncertain and unsafe.
It implies lots of fear.
Because, no, we could say that I'm 50, just turned 52. I mean, maybe in my culture throughout my life, being uncertain and being unsafe were things that were seen as bad. You need to feel safe, you need to feel certain.
You need to have stability,
and feeling
right?
certain, feeling certain helps you feel safe. So there was no emphasis on just what Buddhists call equanimity, like noticing thoughts and emotions, just cultivating your ability to notice a thought and an emotion and how they all relate and how none of it's necessarily true beyond that moment. So I might be feeling scared or sad now, but that doesn't mean that I'll always be scared or sad. And it doesn't mean that the most important thing to do is to think something or act in some way which means I'll get rid of the feeling of being scared or sad. It's just this cultivating this ability to watch thoughts and emotions so that we can be a little bit more chilled out and wise about what we do. So a big part of that, though, is becoming a little bit easier with being unsafe and uncertain, because otherwise we'll rush towards whatever we're told is the certain way to be safe. And that's a massive opportunity for opportunists, populists, authoritarians, religious fanatics to say, do this, you'll be safe. So yeah, that's one thing. How do you get there? Love amongst friends, nature connection, celebration, the mystery of being alive, reconnecting with the original wealth of being alive, which includes marveling at nature, playing together with people, being curious without needing an answer. For me, all these things are just the beauty of being alive, which we can somehow forget in the rush to be safe and successful. So, all of that. Myself being into Buddhist philosophy and practice, I think then obviously meditation and cultivating that equanimity is important. So that would be one prescription for humanity to cope a bit better. There you go.
At least one of the recipes.